All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, there were some who felt that the 11-win Indiana Hoosiers did not belong in this 12-team college football playoff. And of course, now those people who felt that way have plenty of fuel for their fire. The Hoosiers fell last night in round one of the playoff to Notre Dame 27-17. But honestly, that final score was not truly indicative of how that game went. And honestly, I said that in my pregame predictions. I said Notre Dame 30, Indiana 20. And I said, Indiana would probably score late to make the game a little bit closer. And that's truly what we did see last night. You go back to the early stages of the first quarter and that big tone setting run by Notre Dame running back Jeremiah Love, that 98-yard touchdown run, which really got things going. Notre Dame and Indiana had traded turnovers, but nonetheless, Notre Dame really took this game over late in the first quarter, early in the second quarter, especially when they put together that 16-play, 83-yard drive that ate up more than 9 minutes of game clock. That finished with Riley Leonard, connecting with Jaden Thomas on a 5-yard pass to make it 14 to nothing. And honestly, at that point, Notre Dame never looked back. The Fighting Irish, plain and simple, they won this game in the trenches. Notre Dame as a whole, they were bigger, stronger, and better than Indiana. I mean, you look at the game, the Fighting Irish had 193 yards on the ground compared to just 63 for the Hoosiers. And if you take out the 98-yard run from running back Jeremiah Love, Notre Dame still outran Indiana on the ground last night. Now, like I said before, it was a pair of late touchdowns with about a minute and a half left that made the score a lot closer than it was because Notre Dame had this game going away. It was 27-3 at that point. But nonetheless, Indiana quarterback Curtis Rourke picked the wrong night to have his worst game of the season. Still finished with 215 yards passing. Did throw two touchdowns. Of course, those were late. He had that interception. He was sacked three times, and he was harassed all night long by this Notre Dame defense. Rourke was sacked three times, but it seemed like a lot more than that due to the fact that the Fighting Irish were constantly pressuring him. And once Notre Dame built that double-digit lead, this defense was really able to pin their ears back and come after Mr. Rourke. But through it all, with all of that said, I mean, this was still the best season in the history of Indiana football. And yes, I might be in the minority on this, but the Hoosiers deserve to be in the playoff. I mean, look at it. Did Indiana play the toughest schedule in college football this season? Absolutely not. But at the end of the day, team goes 11-1 from the Big Ten. It's very hard to deny them a seat at the table for the college football playoff. And of course, like I said, it was a less than difficult schedule, but I do believe that the Hoosiers were seated right because of that. You weren't going to give them a top 8 seed due to the fact of the lack of competition, if you will, that they played. Indiana's best win this season was a 5-point win at home against a 500 Michigan team this year. And the best thing that you could say was, well, Michigan won the national championship last year, but a lot has changed for the Wolverines since now and then. And then, of course, 2 weeks after that, off of a bye, Indiana went to Columbus and they got destroyed by Ohio State 38-15. So it's one of those where clearly, the competition, was not there. And at the end of the day, it's going to be like this going forward with these mega conferences in this new era of college football. If you have a 16 team or 18 team league, everybody's not going to play everybody. And, we saw it and it's really showing up now. And, I'm going to not knock Indiana on this because at the end of the day, you only play who's on your schedule. And if you're Kurt Signetti, the out of conference schedule was made prior to you even coming to Bloomington to be the school's head football coach. Remember, he was at James Madison a year ago, but nonetheless, Indiana did go out there and take care of their business. But the thing is, we've already seen this happen on a smaller scale in college football. excuse me, from the standpoint that, in the past when the Big Ten had the divisional format. The Big Ten West was for the most part was never as strong as the Big Ten East. And you could say that for the last couple of years in the SEC when they still had the divisional format, the SEC East was not as strong as the SEC West. However, those things usually took care of themselves in the conference championship game. Now, in the current format, it's just the two best teams, the two highest ranked teams, rather, from each conference that are getting it on for the conference championship game. But at the end of the day, Kurt Zignetti and Indiana don't have anything to be ashamed of. Like I said, Notre Dame was and is simply the better team, and it showed last night. And honestly, looking here at round one of this 12-team playoff, guess what? That's why we have seen, the big spreads coming out of Vegas for these games. Look at last night with Notre Dame. Look at what is happening right now with Penn State and SMU. And that trend could continue this afternoon because there's a lot of people out there who expect Texas, if they show up, to beat the brakes off of Clemson. So it's one of those where clearly, this was going to happen. And I think it was going to happen either way last night because if Indiana had won the game and Indiana had beat Notre Dame, people would have questioned Notre Dame's schedule, even though that they were 11-1. And now, obviously that blame is on Indiana, and people are going to be like, well, they did not deserve to be there. I think going forward, though, with the college football playoff, I know pretty soon they're going to go from 12 to 14 teams. This is an experiment right now. This is a huge jump. Okay, first things first. I expected them, if they were going to increase it, maybe go from 4 to 6 or 8. But the bottom line is the networks just threw so much money at the powers that be. It was inevitable for them to not turn it down, which they didn't. It's one of those right now. We're still seeing the gap between the real good teams and the so-so teams. And if Indiana had played a tougher schedule, they're not in the playoff. We're probably talking about them as an 8-14, maybe 7-5, but nonetheless, they took care of their business with everybody who they faced, and it's hard to go against that. But on the flip side for Notre Dame, it's business as usual for them as they held serve. And credit to Marcus Freeman because he had his team ready to play last night. Okay, and Notre Dame has been a much different team following the loss to Northern Illinois, and they were ready to go. Like I said, they dominated this game in the trenches, and that's going to be important going forward because Notre Dame, regardless of whether or not Carson Beck is going to be available for Georgia or not, and I don't think that he is, Notre Dame is going to take a big step up in competition for the Sugar Bowl when they got to travel to New Orleans to take on Georgia. It's one of those where you figure Georgia still has a stellar D. I'm sure Kirby Smart and his staff have sat back and watched that game last night, and they're going to continue to watch the tape and analyze things for Notre Dame. And this Fighting Irish offense really is going to have a test against that Georgia defense. Now, what I will say Notre Dame will have going forward for them, they are no slouches defensively either, and I think they're going to try to go out there and make life as tough as possible for a young Gunnar Stockton at quarterback. Because again, I do not believe Carson Beck is playing in this game. I don't think Carson Beck is playing at anymore this season with that arm injury. That's just the nature of it for Georgia. But nonetheless, we saw Notre Dame go 11-1 during the regular season. Now they're 12-1, and some people are going to question and say, "Hey, the Fighting Irish were actually seated higher in the college football playoff rankings. Should they have gotten a first round bye?" Listen, this is what was agreed upon by the powers that be. It's the four highest ranking conference champions and Notre Dame. And Notre Dame agreed to the current format and they're playing by it. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, I think when it's all said and done, I think things always work out and things play out the way that they should be. But nonetheless, strong win for Notre Dame, and they get to look ahead to Georgia. Now, on the flip side for Indiana, are they going to be able to build off of this? That's going to be the key because it's one of those when you think about Indiana, Big Ten school, yes, no disrespect to them, but they're a basketball school much more than they are a football school. And it's still going to be tough for Kurt Signetti to get recruits to come there. Your NILs nowadays, of course, have to be on point, and he's probably going to have to do things via the JUCO route, the FBS route. Trying to get guys who maybe were overlooked at another big school that possibly want to have an opportunity to shine. That's all good. Whatever you have to do to keep your program relevant. Everybody's not going to have a pocket full of cash like Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and the other powers in the Big Ten. So you have to do what you have to do in order to succeed and keep your program relevant. I don't think Indiana is probably going to be a 10 or 11 win team next season, but I still think with Kurt Signetti calling the shots for this program, they are still going to be very relevant. But nonetheless, big time wake up call for Indiana last night. Notre Dame was not the best team that they faced all season, in my opinion. Okay, I think that's where Ohio State comes into play. But again, the Ohio State game was a litmus test for Indiana, and they failed it. And then, of course, we saw the follow up last night. And again, like I said, the final score was not indicative of how much that the Fighting Irish dominated Indiana. So now the Fighting Irish, they've got themselves about 10 days to get ready for Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And of course, the Bulldogs are going to be well rested after that very physical affair that we saw them have with Texas in the SEC championship game. So we're talking about close to a month rest that Georgia is going to have before they take the field against Notre Dame. But one thing's for sure, we saw throughout this season that Georgia's still Georgia, but their defense is not as dominant as they have been in the past. I do expect Georgia to be a slight favorite in that game, but that does not mean that Notre Dame is not going to bring it. I think we're going to have another very physical affair, and the Fighting Irish and the Bulldogs will definitely be ready for one another. But nonetheless, the first game of this 12-team college football playoff is in the books. It was dominated by the Fighting Irish, and it's on to New Orleans for the Golden Domers. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also a sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out. Drop a line to be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Also, folks, please feel free to keep your eyes and ears peeled for this channel because there's a lot to talk about this weekend in the world of college football, as well as the world of the National Football League. Stretch run time in the NFL. There's a lot to talk about with games today as well as tomorrow. And then, of course, I'm definitely going to be talking about this Penn State game a little bit later. It's one of those narratives, of course, like I said, with the way that things worked out for Indiana last night or lack thereof, and the way that things are working out for SMU tonight or right now, and then possibly for Clemson later, it's going to make the conversation a little bit stronger as far as expanding too much, and some of these teams simply not deserving to be there. But at the end of the day, that's the nature of the beast. It's what the powers that be agreed upon, and everybody, for the most part, has got to deal with it. But nonetheless, it's still a hot topic, and we're definitely going to be talking about it. But, folks, once again, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.